Welcome to the in-depth guide video on how to paint up lioneljohnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels. In this video I'll be covering a multitude of applications that include airbrushing, rattle can applications, dry brushing, and I'll also be sharing some of my favourite techniques and tips in this one massive guide. I'm Nate the Feral Painter. Strap yourselves in because this one's going to be a big one. So just before we get into the main bulk of this video, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to go over. Now I've tried to create this tutorial so that there is something in here for everybody, whether you're a beginner, intermediate or an advanced painter. I'm sure you'll all walk away with a few techniques. Now this is not gospel. I'm not saying this is how you've got to paint your lioneljohnson and you've got to use the paints and everything like that I use. You know, it is your model. You can do with it whatever you like. Now obviously there are going to be points in this video where I do use an airbrush and some dry brushing, and again you don't need these tools. I will go over some more in-depth ways that you can be able to achieve same layer or if not the same results using like dry brushing rather than an airbrushing. Again, the tools that are at bay are completely up to you. You can just follow along this guide with the colours and paint it however you like. So just with that said, let's try and be respectful in the comment sections. So on with the build for lioneljohnson. I'll just quickly go over some tips when it comes to building lioneljohnson. His cape is probably the hardest part of the build, and you will naturally get some gap lines as you see how we're filling these in. And for this you can use a multitude of different products like Vallejo putty, liquid green stuff, or what I like to do is use some Tamiya thin, drop a few sprue pieces in there and you get this nice gloopy plastic that dries really hard, and then it's just a case of sanding it down just to get rid of some of them mold lines. Now because I like to paint in more of the Grimdark style and this leans slightly into the Grimdark aesthetic, I want to add a little bit of texture to his cape, and for that I've just got some liquid green stuff, and this is water soluble so you can thin it with the water, and I just start to stipple it on and stab at it, and you can build it up over multiple layers, and as we start to get painting this will just give the cloth and his cape a little bit more texture. And you can also apply a little bit to the tabards that he has, like his skirt that comes down over his legs as well if you wish to do that, and it just makes it look a little bit more worn, as if you're someone like lioneljohnson who's been around a long time and is trampling through mud. You are going to get some flayed bits of cotton on there as well. Now I do recommend painting lioneljohnson in sub-assemblies. It will make life 10 times easier. It'll look a little bit strange for a while, but as we get going with the process itself, there's little sections that you can start to actually glue on. One of the main bits that I recommend keeping off, if you do decide you want to glue everything together and you're happy to work like that, then that's your choice, but the cape itself at the back, I do remove that, as you know, this is a crucial part of the painting process. It's really hard to get to those undergarment sections as well. The heads, if you do cut them off of the sprue in a certain way, then you get this nice little paint handle and all the heads sit nicely on the actual sprue itself so that you can hold it and paint them at the same time. To grip them into some little holders, all I've got is some wine bottle or some cork, and I've got some paper clips with a little bit of blue tack or super glue and leveled them in and just stuck them into there, and it just enables me to be able to hold something. There are naturally some clips that I'm going to be holding for when we get into some of the priming stages as well. These like little crocodile clips, they normally go on Amazon and you get these paint model holders, and this just makes life 10 times easier. Again, the sub-assemblies section is entirely up to you. If you want to just go ahead and paint your model fully glued together, that is up to you, but life is so much easier in sub-assemblies. Now let's talk priming and the initial first base coat colour, as these two colours sort of go in conjunction together, and it's just going to make life 10 times easier, and it sort of sets the foundation for the rest of the painting of the miniature, as there's a lot of green in it with him being a dark angel. I naturally like to use airbrush primers for my primer of choice. Again, all the colour, every single colour that is listed and I've used in this will be listed in the description below, and there'll also be a link to Element Games and an affiliate link that you can click on and get every single product that I've used in this video if you want to try and replicate the actual process that I've done, and I just get a little bit of a kickback from that. So once I've primed it in black, I'm immediately going to come in with Caliban green as my initial first base coat tone. Now I'll work my way all the way around the cloth sections of the armour, and say if you're going to do this with say if you've not got an airbrush and you wanted to do this with a rattle can, a really good, quick and efficient way of doing this, because the colours go together, is using a rattle can equivalent. So Citadel sell the Caliban green as a rattle can, and you can also go to places like Colourforge or Army Painter for the actual colour matches if you don't have those in your country. So prime it in black with a rattle can, and then from a zenithal, so from above, just give it a light dusting of the Caliban green or the equivalents of them as well. Now what that's going to do is, because what you might just say, you know, why don't I just spray it in Caliban green? There's two reasons for that. One, we don't want everything to be super green, especially the armour, because it's got a lot of black onto the armour. It's just got like hints and tints of green on there. But also what it's going to do, because we've put that black base coat down first, it's not going to go on as light or as too strong, and it's just going to be a little bit more subtle on there, and it's going to shift that tone a little bit into more of the tone that we're trying to achieve. So at this point, I'm just working my way around the miniature, which is especially the cape and his cloth sections, and so the armour itself. Now I do apply it to the armour a little bit more like it is on the box art, where it's more green towards his feet and all the shadow sections are actually in the darkness, because that's sort of what lioneljohnson's armour looks like on the artwork, and obviously on the box itself it's more black and the highlights are green rather than just a black armour that's highlighted in such as a grey. It's almost highlighted in this really nice bluish teal green. Now for this section on the highlight of this colour, we're only going to be concentrating this highlight specifically on any of the cloth sections. Don't use this colour on any of the armour. We're going to use a different colour for that a little bit later on. And as I'm explaining these colours, you might notice in the video that it jumps back and forth a little bit. You might see like the armour's a little bit more finished than the cloth as I'm explaining it. It's just for continuity so that it's easier to follow this guide. But straight away, we're going to come in after this with Kalabite green, and if you've got an airbrush, you're going to apply it on a zenithal to all the cloth sections as a highlight. And again, don't worry about any overspray areas, because we're going to clean these up a little bit later on. Now in this part of the video is where I want to speak about an alternative way, because I know not a lot of you do have the airbrushes, and I'm sure a lot of you will be picking up lioneljohnson and want to follow this colour scheme. Now I'm not going to fully explain it in this video, but we're going to use a dry brushing, because I do use dry brushing for the actual final highlight colour of the cloth itself. But if you want to follow along for the rest of the tutorial without using the airbrush, then I really highly recommend going over to Artist Opus and watching his way of explaining dry brushing and the ways that you can blend it, and the results that he gets makes it look as though it's actually been airbrushed. So if you really not got an airbrush and you want to go and check that out, then that is the video, which I'll leave in the link in the description below, that you can go over and check out and learn how to do a dry brushing properly without getting it all chalky and awful. And so any points in this where I'm using an airbrush, go over and check out that video, because ultimately it's probably an even superior and better method than actual airbrushing. I just prefer the look of an airbrush with those nice blends. But again, a little bit later on for the next colour for the cloth, we are going to be utilising that dry brushing method. So after you've put the Kalabite green on, as you've seen in this video, even though we've already airbrushed that colour on, I came in and actually dry brushed it over the top as well, just to catch some more of those raised edges. As I've thinned that paint, it's not going to go on as opaque or as strong through an airbrush due to the atomization of the paint, so it's just a good idea just to come in and catch some more raised edges. Now, as a final highlight colour for any of the cloth sections, I'm going to come in with a little bit of Moot's green mixed 50-50 with the Calabite green, and again dry brush those raised section, just catching and bringing out those final highlight colours, leaving that nice depth and shadow in the actual shadows themselves. So to recap the cloth areas, it's a base coat of Caliban green, then followed up by Kalabite green, and then added some 50-50 with Moot green as a final highlight. If you do want to make it pop a little bit more, you can just go in with that final highlight of Moot green itself. It's a little bit too overpowering, but you know, it's entirely up to you how bright and green you actually want it to be. The last part of the cape is obviously the underneath, as it is a different colour. It's a creamy colour, and for this I've come in with Steel Legion drab, dry brushed a little bit of karak stone onto there if you want to do the dry brushing method, and then finally for the final highlight, so you don't go too mad with this, just add a little bit of wraith bone to that to catch the raised edges, and that is the undergarments for the cream sections done. Alternatively, I put a lioneljohnson out a long time ago where it didn't have the green cloth, and it was the alternative to this where everything, all the cloth was cream and just his armour was green. And if you do want to do that method, then you can just follow these colours for the actual underside of his cape as well. Now for his armour itself, this is one of my favourite things to paint on lioneljohnson himself. I really love the look of his armour, and a lot of my Dark Angels tutorials are actually based off this colour armour, because I don't really like the actual original Dark Angels green colour. So for this we've got Sons of Horus green, and I'm hitting all those highlight areas, leaving it black in the shadow areas. And again, if you're going to be using the dry brushing method, just go in and hit those highlighted points, so you can just dry brush it over, and then that way you're going to get some instant edge highlighting as well. But because I've used an airbrush and we've got some overspray, and I just want to reinforce those shadows a little bit more, I actually came in with some Baden Black and just fired it into those shadow areas. Now at this point as well, is a good idea to glue your cape back on to the miniature, and because we don't need to worry about that little sub-assembly anymore, because we've got all those undergarments and all those harder to reach areas. Now we can start to move on to some finer and more detailed points on this miniature to take it to the next level. So to create some more finer details on the armour and make it stand out a little bit, we're actually going to be doing, I can't believe I'm saying this, some edge highlights. Now we're not going to be adding edge highlights in the traditional fashion where you literally work your way around every single corner and every single edge. Something like this does benefit a little bit from having some edge highlights, but they're not going to be in such a way that, you know, it's done in the like traditional envy metal style. We're just literally going to be highlighting up some edges just to make things pop a little bit and highlight the edges where the light would naturally catch more. So you don't need to worry about edge highlighting every single part of it, especially the areas like the under the legs and just areas where the light's not really going to be touching. All we're trying to do with these edge highlights is just emphasize the corners of where that light is going to be striking. So I've got some Sons of Horus green to be able to do this, even though I know we've just sprayed some on there. Again, it's going to go on a little bit nicer, and because of those darker areas, it's just going to make everything pop out that little bit more. Often on this channel, I always get asked, can we have a wet cam palette? For the style of painting that I do, it's not really going to be beneficial, and also I know sometimes you can see mixing the colours and stuff, but I don't think they're really beneficial, and it's just a lot of time and extra money to buy another camera and editing and all that stuff just to be able to see it. The key here is just to get that paint flowing off your brush nice. So you're not having to apply loads of pressure, it's not dragging, it's just flowing enough, so you're just going to thin that paint enough so that it's flowing nicely off your brush. And also another reason I don't like to use wet cam palettes, and I might say, oh, you know, I've thinned my paint 50-50, but my pot of paint might be a year old or 2 years old, and it could be either super thin or it could be even thickened up. So I'm having to like add a little bit more water to mine to make it that little bit thinner. And then when you get yours and try and mix it 50-50, you might be like, well, it's not coming out like it did yours. So that's the main reason I don't really have a wet cam palette. But some tips I can give you around these sort of applications is we're just going to be creating microscopic dots and scratches, especially around the lower half of the miniature. So let's say we've now got a nice consistency where it's flowing off our brush really nice. And when you've got something like a glove or a bit of kitchen roll at the side, I tend to remove the excess paint off it. So I've only got a very small amount on my actual brush, and this just allows you to control that paint a little bit more and get some thinner strands. Now I do recommend obviously having a brush that's got some nice little points on the end of it. I use quite a lot of the Artist Opus ones when I'm trying to do more detailed work, but any brush will work as long as it's got a nice point on it as well. But I dip it in, make sure it's flowing off nice off my brush. I sort of remove the excess on either my hand or my glove or a bit of kitchen towel, and then just very lightly just start to drag across the actual panels of the armor. Now let's say if I'm going to do an edge highlight, like a line, rather than actually just doing it a straight line like you would do when you normally edge highlighting, I want it to be broken up a little bit more. So as you can see, sometimes I'm tapping it, sometimes I'm just adding little scratches, sometimes I'm just adding some lines, but breaking it up is just going to give it that more worn appearance to the armor. And just as you're building it up, you can control the actual amount that is going on there as well. So let's say if you don't get the perfect line, but you want it to be a perfect line, doing this tippy-tappy method is also a great way to ensure that you're getting some straight edges, because you can just go back in and touch them up. But especially around the lower half of his armor where, you know, he's walking through rocks and stuff, I'm going to add a little bit more scratches to those sections. Also, remember to, at this point, paint areas like the backpack and making sure you're edge highlighting all those, including his helmet as well. Now there is a big time jump in this part of the video, but don't worry, you've not missed anything out, and I still will be going over everything. All I've applied here are some base coats. Ignore the head option for the moment, we'll get into that into the later portion of the video. And just to save time and not get you sitting here for another 15 minutes while I talk and go over the ways I've applied the base coats, we're just simply applying some base coats to this miniature. For all his golden accents, or all the gold trim across the entire miniature, including the shield, but don't worry, we'll come back to that again because I want to go over some base colours for the actual shield because it's got this nice reddish brown tone to it. All these were base coated out in Pro Acryl Dark Bronze, and this is a really nice colour that I like to start off with, as it gives a nice warm feel to that golden armour that we're going to work upon a little bit later. All the red parts, like the little tabard and his moment of oaths, any red sections on the armour as well, all these were base coated out in AK Burnt Red. Any grey sections or areas that we are going to be working up to white, these were base coated out in AK Smoke. Any silver metallic areas, these were base coated out in Citadel's Iron Warriors. And then finally, any leather sections like his strap and his gun holster, these were base coated out in Citadel's Rhinox Hide. To highlight the leather, to start off with, we're going to get some AK Hull Red, mix it 50-50 with the Rhinox Hide, apply a first highlight, and then finally a highlight of the Hull Red on its own, and this does include the belt as well. The shield was given the exact same treatment with the exact same colours, a base coat of Rhinox Hide, highlighted up with Hull Red. Again, you can use the dry brushing method for this part of the video. Now moving on to the golden sections, and I used a dry brushing application to start to build up these colours. We're going to add some highlights to this, A little bit later on we're going to add a wash, and then we're going to give it a final highlight a little bit later on. But to start the highlight, I got some scale colour 75 Necro gold and applied a dry brush of that across the entire armour. And again, the reason I like to dry brush my metallics is because it leaves these microscopic little in-scale scratches and marks across the miniature, and again it picks out all those raised edges, leaving that dark bronze in the recesses. Scale colour 75's Peridot alchemy was used as a final highlight on the actual golden trim and armour sections of this miniature. And again, will after this, once we've gone over some of the silver metallic areas, show you a nice little wash that we can apply, and then we're going to come in with a final highlight on the golden areas as well. All the shield, this was painted, all the golden areas on the shield were painted exactly the same as well, with the same colours as what we've previously used. If you do want to change this up a little bit, you know, you might just want to go for the Necro gold if you want, because he is carrying the Emperor's shield. If you want this to look slightly different, feel free to change up maybe one or two of the actual golden colours themselves. For the silver metallic areas, this was just given a little dry brush of Rungfang steel atop of the Iron Warriors, just to bring everything out, highlight those edges, and just make everything pop that little bit more. For any sections that we're going to work up to white from the AK smoke, and you can go as bright as you want with this, and I do try and keep some a little bit in the dark and then moving it up, you know, like the main highlights onto the actual white. We're going to apply in a dry brush some AK neutral grey, and then slowly start to add some Pro Acryl bold titanium white until we're finally at the white on its own as a final highlight. And now the reason I like to dry brush it on first is because it does pick out some of those edges, and this sort of acts as a guide to add your final white highlights at the end. And then once we do add the wash, because we're going to add a wash just after this, and once we've done that final wash, we're going to come in again, because it's going to dull it down a little bit, with a final highlight of bold titanium white, just to pick out some more of those edges. But it does act as a really nice guide using that dry brush to be able to come in and pick out some of those areas with just a standard brush. For the red sections, using that same dry brushing technique, we're going to highlight this up with Citadel's Maphistyn red, and this does include any of the moment of oaths around the miniature. But on his helmet, these little wings he's got coming off his helmet, there's a final highlight only on that section. I'm going to give it a dry brush of Evil Sun's Scarlett. Once all that has dried, we can now come in with a wash, and we're going to apply this to the gold sections, any of the white sections, the silver metallic sections, and also those red sections that we've just completed. And now to do this, if you've got nun oil, you can come in with nun oil, but I don't typically like to use that, as it tends to leave like this glossiness behind it. But for this, we are going to use the contrast paint from Citadel, which is Citadel's Rattling Grime. This is a really nice wash that you can use just on any of the metallic areas, and just as an overall Grimdark sort of unifying wash around the miniature. One, because it tends to dry a little bit more matte, but rather than thin it with the contrast medium, I'm actually going to thin it with water. So we're going to get some loaded up onto his wet palette, and I'm going to thin it with 2 parts water. What this is going to do, it's going to break up that pigment, and I know it's not really going to act as a contrast paint because we don't really want that, but it's going to get a little bit of the properties of a contrast paint, and that's the reason why I like to use it, because it sort of adds these little stains in and around the miniature once it's dry, and it just makes everything look that little bit more dirty and grimy. And because we've thinned it with 2 parts water, it's going to help it flow into those recesses and mainly stay in the recesses like a normal wash would. And then immediately after that, once it's all dry, with every final highlight colour that we've just previously used, which was like the bold titanium white, the Peridot alchemy, and Evil Sun Scarlet, we're just going to come back in just to pick out some more of those edges, as it's going to dull it down a little bit, just to make sure that everything's nice and popping and everything's got that contrast in and around those areas that we've just painted.
For his little lion pelt that goes onto the back of the cape, this was given a base coat of Steel Legion drab, followed up by a coat or a highlight of Middlestone. Again, I know I've used an airbrush for this application, but there is nothing wrong with using the dry brushing technique that I've consistently spoke about throughout this video, because a lot of people, you know, don't have airbrushes, and I don't know, I keep going on about it, but I just don't want people clicking off the video thinking that they can't achieve these results without having an airbrush, because you really can. But once that's dry, we're going to give it a wash of Agrak's Earthshade, and then once all that has dried up, we're going to come in with the dry brush just to pick out some of those little fur details and highlights. And we're going to do this by using a 50-50 mix of Middlestone and Decomposed Flesh by AK. But if you don't have those colours, which is the Decomposed Flesh, you can simply add a little bit of a lighter colour, something like Wraithbone, and just mix it 50-50 with the AK Middlestone, and just give it one final dry brush on some of the highlighted sections where the light is naturally going to hit. Now, for the moment of oath, so a lot of people always ask me, you know, what's the best way that you can actually paint these? And there are a couple of different ways that you can actually paint these, you know, using whatever colours you want. So you can do more like the bleachy tone, which is the one that I tend to go for a little bit, or you can do more of a whitish one. That way you'd probably use greys and whites. But for this one that I've used on this miniature, these three colours were all used in conjunction with each other. So they were given a base of AK Dark Brown, and then with AK Decomposed Flesh, and a final highlight of AK Deck Tan. But the application for this is what I really want to talk about, because this is what's going to give it that parchment-like look. So the base coat of dark brown, you just literally slap that on, two nice little even coats, making sure it's all on there. And then you can either use a mix for the Decomposed Flesh. You'll probably see me switching it up throughout this video, which is either some dry brushing, just to make sure I'm getting some nice coverage on it, but I'm always doing it in these parallel scratchy lines, and that's what's going to build up that parchment-like look to the actual moment of oaths themselves. And then finally, for the actual final highlight, I'm only picking out certain areas, so like more of the raised edges. So if you put like the shield in a certain position, you can sort of see where the light hits, and that's where I want to come in with a final highlight of Deck Tan, just as in, again, using that parallel lines just to pick out some more of those raised details. And if you want, you can do these in multiple layers, because this will add, and you'll be able to see through them if you thin it a little bit with water, and you'll be able to see through each layer. And again, leaning more into that linen or like parchment type look to the actual moment of oaths themselves. Now let's talk head options and flesh. Now for this first application, I'm going to go over an airbrush application, but there is some brush work in this. But there's a specific reason I like to use airbrush, especially when it comes to flesh applications, because one, it goes on really smooth, and you know, it just looks more skin-like. But there's nothing wrong using the brush application, because we are going to come in and do a little bit of brush work on its own. And for the actual hooded option, every part of that was actually painted using just the brush itself. I couldn't, naturally, because he's got a hood on, I couldn't use an airbrush for that. So to start with, we're going to give everything a base coat of Bugman's Glow. And I just lightly, especially when you use an airbrush, don't go crazy with this. Make sure you're thinning it nice and just build it up over a few layers. And then from a zenithal, and you'll notice I've got one side of the face in shadow, but from a zenithal, like a 45-degree angle coming down, I'm going to highlight that with Acadian Flesh Tone. And then finally, as one last little highlight on the brightest sections, we're going to use Flayed One Flesh. But just make sure, if you're doing it through an airbrush, just to make sure that you are thinning those paints so that you're not obscuring any of the details. Immediately after this, once everything has dried, we're going to come in with a wash of Citadel's Targor Raid Shade. Now you'll notice in the video, I'm not just literally slapping it all over the miniature. If anything, I'm just picking out areas that I want it to flow into the recesses, especially around the eyes and mouth, and any areas around where the hair connects to the skin and the ears. You might notice after this, because you can sort of glaze it in there, that you won't actually have to do any highlighting after this stage, especially if you've done the airbrush application. However, if you are doing the brush application like I did on the hooded option, you might want to give it a wash everywhere. But if you do want to add a final highlight, just get your flayed one flesh, thin it down a little bit, and you maybe just pop some onto like the eyebrows and little areas, or his nose. Any areas that you just want to pop and add a little bit more contrast. A lot of people always ask me, how do you paint eyes? I can't really show this on camera because it is quite hard to be able to do this, but just using bold titanium white, I just gave it a little bit of a dot inside each one. It can take a few attempts. I'm not the best at painting eyes, but I just went in there and just very lightly just built it up, and I recommend doing this with a minimal amount on your brush and actually just dotting them in. For the hair, I gave it a base coat of AK Grim Brown, so it was AK Grim Brown as a base coat across the entire hair, and then using decomposed flesh and then wraith bone as a final highlight. I just went round there mixing those colours together until I was happy with the actual finished tone of the colour. If you do make any mistakes, you can always go in there with something like Agrek Surfshade just to deepen up some of those areas, but make sure, because especially when you've done the airbrush like style of the application, you haven't really got any hair on his hooded option, it's just the beard, but you want to be following those highlights that you've done. So because we've come in from a 45-degree angle on the left side of his head, I'm going to naturally be highlighting the hair up brighter on those points as well. His lenses, or the eye lenses of his helmet, and including the other helmet option, it's a little bit hard to paint those with the actual hood over them. There's not really much of it showing, but going up in colours, I gave it a base coat of AK Burnt Red, then came in with Evil Sun's Scarlett, a Wild Rider Red, which you'll notice on the helmet in the feathers as well. I actually gave those a final little dry brush of Wild Rider Red. And then if you've got an orange, a really bright orange or a really bright yellow, just as one final little tickle of a highlight, I don't know why I said tickle, one final little highlight right in the corners, I just gave that one little highlight. But the trick here, when you're doing these, once you're going up in those layers, obviously there's like a little lip at the bottom where they, just underneath the actual eye lenses themselves. And to get almost like an OSL glow effect, with each highlight that I go up, obviously each highlight is going to get tighter towards the centre where his nose would be. This is where his eyes will be looking forward, and these are going to be the brightest point. But for that little lip underneath, with each highlight that would go up, every time that I do it, I get the edge of my brush and I just give it a actual little edge highlight on that lower lip to give it that OSL effect. Now, an alternative way to do this, if you've not got all these colours, or just an even quicker, easier way, is to go in there with like a dark grey, slowly work your way up towards white, and then get something like a contrast paint and apply this inside as well, and that'll probably even go on a little bit brighter, but I like this really nice, warm, brightish glow to the actual eyes. But you can alternatively, you can do it using contrast paints and whites. If you want to put the little white dot in like Citadel do in each corner, you can do that as well. Now, after this, I like to call this stage my refinement stage. This is just a little stage that I always like to do. Let's say if I've done a night of painting and I've got everything complete, I like to put the miniature off to one side, come back to it another night with some fresh eyes, and literally just go in there and refine everything that we've already done. You might see bits that you've missed. And for areas such as the green armour, you've just seen I've got a mix of the Sons of Horus green and Seborite green, and I'm just going to use this just to pick out certain areas and just highlight them as though the light's hitting it a little bit more, and just really, basically all it is, it's just a tidy up phase around the miniature and just refining everything and just pushing everything that little bit further. And this is a stage that I highly recommend, especially if you've just started out painting or you'd really want to push your skills to the next level. It's just going around, refining everything, adding some extra highlights, making sure everything's nice and neat, adding some text to the scrolls if you want to do that. And just overall, just making sure we've pushed this miniature to the max and that we're just generally happy with everything. Now, as a final stage to the cape, just a little bit of weathering. I did say this right at the beginning, this step is optional, and you can do this with acrylic washes if you want to do that. But again, I've come in with Villain Inks, Goon's Grime, and Decrepit Filth. Decrepit Filth, by the time this video releases, is not available just yet, but within a few weeks of this product will start shipping, or alternatively, you can come in with some oil paints. But this weathering stage is completely optional for the miniature. If you want to keep it nice and clean, you can, but I just wanted to add a little bit of tattiness and grime around the bottom of the cape, and I've just applied some and then came in with some mineral spirits and just picked it back off, and using the reductive technique and dissolve, add some streaks here and there, and I think I even added a little bit around his legs, as I've been trampling it through the mud as well. But I really encourage, with any miniature that you paint, put it off to one side, come back to it another night, and if you're painting something like a captain, and do this refinement stage. Finally, for this miniature is the sword, and I'm going to apply an almost NMM/ effect. But for this, all I've done is I've obviously masked everything off, and getting some masking tape, I very carefully place it down one side, and this will just make everything look a little bit more sharper. Then with some white, I've actually got the Tamiya flat white for this, and because it goes on really smooth and you can build it up and build it up, I've just very gently, leaving some shadow areas, and on the sharper areas just applied it on there. And then what I do then is, once it's dry, is I switch over, so I take the actual masking tape off, I switch over to the other side of the sword and do the exact same thing. However, let's say you've got a highlight at the bottom and the top. When you switch over, you're going to do it towards the middle, so it's almost got alternative, not checkered, but like checkered style, where it's like dark white on the opposite side. Now, for the glow effect, all I'm going to do for this is actually get some contrast paint. You can choose whatever colour you want. If you want to do a warm one, choose a warm one. For this, I use the contrast paint Croxigore scales, I believe it's called, and just very lightly, and just added like a mist effect, but especially around the actual power where the handles come out, where it would maybe glowing a bit more, I had it a little bit stronger on those. Then after that, it's just a case coming in with some white on the actual, I want to call them bobbles, but they're not, the little bolt parts, what I presume would be glowing up if this were a real sword. Just add a touch of white on there, and if you want to add some little scratches with some silver or the Rungfang steel, and just edge highlight the actual sword, and that'll just finish everything off, and it just adds that little bit more of a pop to the sword. Again, this stage is optional, or you can do it with a brush, just edge highlight it and go in there with some contrast paint around those little bolts on the sword as well. To start the base, I'm going to come in with some modelling clay or modelling putty. Any will do for this. If you want to get the green stuff, mix it together, or the milliput, you can do that. But for bases, I tend to use that Daz clay that you've just seen. I think it's called Daz or Daz. I'm not sure what it's called. It's super cheap. I think it's like £2 to £4 here in UK, and you don't have to mix anything together. You can just literally pull it off, and it's a really good way of raising up areas on your base, because I think they just want this middle section to just go flat, and then just like feather off towards the end. If you are going to add your little watches to the base, you need to make room for them, but I didn't choose that option for this. But I've just gone on there, pushed it around, and made sure it's in an actual shape that I'm happy with, and then just getting some bricks or some pieces that generally come with bases that we don't tend to use, or any sort of rocks or anything like that. Before it dries, I actually push them into the base as well. I think for this, I used just some random kits that were lying about. I had some sort of Gondor Lord of the Rings ruins that went really well with this, just to give the miniature a little bit more life and go ahead with that sort of destruction that comes with the lioneljohnson model. Then you need to give it a couple of hours to dry before moving on to the next stage. At this point, apply any texture paste that you want to your base, because we are going to paint it. It doesn't really matter what sort of texture paste you use. If you want to use a concrete one or a sandy one, I'll be honest, They're all pretty much the same, they've just got different colours. I used AK Mud Effects on around mine. It's got these tiny little granules in it, and it just helps add a little bit of texture to the base as well. But don't worry about the actual colour itself, just get some on there. Some do come with different size grit inside them, but any will actually work for this. Now to paint it, it's actually really simple to do this to the base. It was quite a quick base. I primed it in a grey. So I've gone for like a grey, and it's just a case of coming in with some dry brushing of some alternative greys to pick out things. Go in there, make sure that you're painting all like your gold and your steel elements, and then I came in and added some browns, just airbrush some contrast paints over at top of that. And again, this stage is entirely to you. If you want a different basing scheme, if you want to be more limestone, you go for a limestone style. Or if you want to do something that's a little bit more sandy, or you might even go for a Nurgle type one. It's entirely up to you. But just dry brush and painting it in any colours that you want. And for this I did, if you've got some oils or some enamels like Goon's Grime, I gave it a wash of that as well. And then to finish it off, I just got some ground texture or some ground mix. These are regularly available from any hobby stores, and they've normally got like different coloured rocks in them. And I just scatter these on, or you can glue them on if you want to add some grass tufts, do that as well. It's quite a simple and easy basing effect, if you know, depending on what sort of basing that you're wanting to do. And you can secure these in place with PVA glue and mortar, or if you've got some gravel and sand fixer, you can do that as well. Now I know we've come to the end of this tutorial, but don't click off just yet. There's a couple of final thoughts, then little hints and tips that I do want to go over on this video. Number one being, if you've got any questions regarding this, then please let me know in the comment section below. And to help me push this video out, make sure that you do like this video and maybe interact with it, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. If you want to see a more Grimdark version of this, I've got something planned in the future where I'm going to combine the actual original 30k lioneljohnson and combine it with this one to do more of a Grimdark style. So let me know if you do actually want to see that as well. But ultimately, I hope you've been able to take something from this video. I know it's been a bit of a longer video of mine, and I've gone more into depth with things, and there are maybe areas that I have missed. But ultimately, I hope you've been able to take something from it. But just taking your time, going over, and don't worry as well. You know, a lot of people get stuck with certain colours, especially when it comes to like the bleachy colours and the blonde and browns. Just if you've not got these colours, don't feel that you have to go out and buy these. Most colour ranges do have colour matches, so it's just a case of finding colours that are very similar to this, where you can actually go on it. Now obviously play like areas like the Armour, which is like the Sons of Horus green, you can actually, you know, I do recommend using those colours to achieve that. But don't get too stuck with thinking you've got to go out and buy a ton of new colours. Again, you can grab these from my affiliate links below, and all the paint list and everything will be below as well. But most brands do have alternative colours, so you can use and go along with them. Don't, again, feel you've got to have an airbrush for everything. You know, it does help. I tend to use them for speed and blending and all that sort of good stuff. If you're gonna play with this guy and you want to actually use him in your armies, you know, feel free to varnish it. I'd recommend something like a satin varnish rather than a matte varnish, but again, this is entirely up to you which sort of look you want. If you wanted to use it for gaming and protect it. If there's any other questions or anything you want to know, then please ask me below. I'd like to thank you for coming along and watching this video. It's been a blast. It's been my most requested video, but we've finally got it out there. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. This one has actually sold now. Somebody reached out and actually purchased this miniature for me. I do commissions now and again when I get the time. I don't do armies. It's more one-off pieces that I do. So if you are interested in a lioneljohnson or anything like that, then just feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. But thanks for watching, guys. Again, I hope you've been able to take something from it. Remember to rate, comment, subscribe, all that sort of good stuff. But until next time, guys, I will catch you in my next video.